So I hope that you all had a blessed Christmas. Did you all have a good Christmas? Good. We had a good Christmas too. On Christmas Day, just after the four of us had gathered around our Christmas tree and we exchanged our gifts, we went to John's parents for Christmas brunch, which is the tradition that we do. We go for Christmas brunch with John's parents and his siblings and their families. Our sister-in-law, Anka, grew up in Poland, and she came to the United States as a young adult. And so it's always been really fun to get to share in some of her traditions, and she lets us in on some of the things that she likes to do and ways that she likes to celebrate. She prepares amazing food, like incredible food that takes days and days and days. She and her sister get together and they cook for days, and then we get to enjoy all of this wonderful, delicious food. The Anka's tradition is that they do not put their Christmas tree up until Christmas Eve, and she sticks to it. They don't put their tree up until Christmas Eve. And so when they were on their way to Christmas brunch that morning, something caught Anka's eye that made her very, very frustrated. Their neighbor across the street had already taken their tree down and thrown it on the curb. This did not set very well with her. It was Christmas Day. She had just put hers up the night before. She was ready to celebrate Christmas, and her neighbor was just done with it already. Now, who knows? They might have been traveling, and it might have been a safety thing, but it really did not set well with Anka that morning. You know, Advent is a season that we say it's a season of waiting, but Anka's heartbreak over this tree had me realizing that there are some things that we don't really wait for. Like we don't wait to celebrate Christmas until Christmas gets here. We don't wait for the sparkle and the glitter and the glitz and the lights. We bring it on. As soon as Thanksgiving is done, and maybe even before Thanksgiving is done, we are ready for that sparkle. But then there are several people that want to take it down immediately. I'm not one of them. I've kept it up all year long once, mostly because I was just way too busy. But I like to surround myself with Christmas. But you know, there's this feeling like we want to get it taken down and put away and cleaned up. And I always feel so sad when I have to take down my tree and take down the lights. And I think that when we put the lights away and the ornaments away and the sparkle, it just feels like the world is a little bit more dim at that point. I was thinking that perhaps we don't even notice the darkness that's coming towards us before Christmas because we're lighting it up with all of these sparkly things. But then as soon as those Christmas lights are taken down, we really notice the impact. The nights are super long right now, and the days are so short, and that really can impact your mood. It can leave you feeling like, where is the light? Today is Epiphany Sunday. Tomorrow, the 6th, will actually be Epiphany. And so on Epiphany, we remember some wise folks who were wandering around looking for the light. They were moving towards the light. When we look at pictures of the nativity scene, have you noticed that we envision these wise men following this super bright star that is almost like a spotlight that is right directly over top of the manger, and it is so bright that I can't imagine how anyone could miss this amazing scene. And yet, in the story of Matthew, it kind of doesn't quite seem to be the case. This amazing thing happened, and these wise ones recognize the signs in the stars in the sky, and they come searching for a king. But other people haven't really noticed this light. This wasn't even anywhere on Herod's radar until these wise ones showed up at his door. The wise men went looking for this new king the stars were pointing them to bring their gifts and to pay homage, but the star must not have quite been the spotlight that we imagine. And then it seems like as the wise ones approached, they didn't quite trust their direction. They kind of questioned, why on earth would they be headed towards Bethlehem? Kings belong in Jerusalem, this gleaming city on the hill. And so that is where they went in search of this king. Today oh no, we didn't, because I didn't read the scripture. Today we read and we didn't. Oh goodness. Now that is That is good. Well, you know what? I could go back and find it, but I don't have it in my notes. We're going to go forward. I was going to read from Isaiah. We have been in Isaiah. Well, you'll just have to imagine with me. I'll tell the story. It's a story where the prophet is talking to us about this gleaming city on a hill. This gleaming city. And this passage from Isaiah is something that is kind of imagined by the prophet. If you remember when we looked at Isaiah quite a bit during Advent, and Isaiah is kind of best understood when it's divided into three sections. So first Isaiah happened before the exile, before the destruction of the temple. And then second Isaiah is written from exile. So while they're scattered and they've lost their homes, that's where those passages are from. But the passage that I was supposed to read to you today was from third Isaiah. And this is actually written after the exile, when the people have been able to come back to Jerusalem. So the Persians defeated the Babylonians. The Babylonians were the ones that destroyed the temple and sent the Judeans into the exile. And so then, 70 years down the road, the Persians defeated the Babylonians, and after the Persians took control of the area, the Persian king allowed the exiles to return to Jerusalem and eventually to rebuild their temple. And so the passage that I was supposed to have read was coming out of that context. But can you imagine just hearing that story? Can you imagine what it may have felt like for these exiles that had returned home after all of these years? I imagine that they were probably filled with excitement, like they were living in the middle of the fulfillment of a promise, like all of those unbelievable promises that the prophets had been sharing with them were going to be coming true. I imagine that some of the people who were coming back to Jerusalem had never been there the first time around. They were only hearing the stories. But I also imagine that this return came with some very, very deep hurt. The exiles were returning to the scene of their trauma, where they had been violently removed from their homeland. Nothing was like it was before they had left. The temple, where what they believed to be the very house of God, was gone. Can you imagine what that would have felt like? Perhaps you've experienced something like this. When I was thinking about what this might be like, I was thinking about people who return to their homes after a tornado or after some other kind of natural disaster and standing in their homes in the aftermath, or the victims of a fire that are standing in the smoldering remains of home. As I was trying to place myself into the story to understand how these words might have felt if I was hearing them from that context, my mind went to ground zero on 9/11. How would they rebuild in the midst of all this rubble? It had to be incredibly disheartening to see their homes and their temple reduced to rubble. This had to be gut-wrenching. For the ones who had lived through the exile, perhaps when they came back, that trauma just came flooding back. And then once again, from amidst the despair of the words of the prophet, we hear the words of this prophet asking us to imagine a new vision. To imagine a city that is gleaming with light, a city that is put back together. The prophet imagined a gathering together, people flocking the city, drawn to the glory of the city. Many of the exiles had already settled and made lives for themselves in the diaspora during the 70 years that had passed. And so not everybody decided to return, and this was a heartbreak for the people too. They were standing there in the rubble of their home, and they felt a deep desire to just bring everybody home, to rebuild their community as well as their temple. And so, this vision that the prophet spoke directly to their hopes and their dreams. Talk about a hopeful imagination, a city rebuilt and gleaming, people being drawn to the glory of this city. But this was not the reality that they found themselves standing in. They had to imagine these things. This week, the theme of imagination has seemed to come at me from a lot of different directions that were kind of unrelated. And so here we are again, imagining with the prophets, imagining something so wildly too good to be true, visions that could easily just be brushed off as wishful thinking. Can you feel what it would have felt like to hear these really promising words from in the middle of the rubble? Seriously? I'm standing in the trash heap of my former home, and you are telling me that this place is going to shine like the top of the Chrysler building? That had to take some imagination to get there. This week I read the book, The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven by Sherman Alexie. Have any of you read it? It's an interesting book. It's an interesting book. It's a book, honestly, that I am still really wrestling with. It is full of humor and love and life and community. And also it's terrible pain and tragedy and the hopelessness of the unrealized potential of life on a reservation. Honestly, this book broke my heart. This one little chunk has stuck with me all week, and it was written as an equation. It said survival equals anger plus imagination. And Alexie went on to say imagination is the only weapon on the reservation. I thought, imagination as a weapon of survival? So that's been stirring around inside of me. And then this week, I also listened to a podcast of On Being where Krista Tippett was interviewing Bessel van der Kolk. I really didn't do a good job on that. Professor of psychiatry at Boston University Medical School. He first became interested in the effects of trauma as a young psychiatrist who was working with Vietnam veterans. And then he went on to devote his life's work to the impact of trauma and the recovery from trauma. He's written a couple of books. One of the books is called The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. And as I was enjoying this interview, I thought, wait a minute. I just bought that book a few months ago on one of those 99-cent Kindle deals, and it was sitting on my Kindle just waiting for me to read. So I read that book this week. And once again, imagination was shining out. Imagination is absolutely critical to the quality of our lives. Our imagination enables us to leave our routine, everyday existence by fantasizing about travel, food, sex, falling in love, or having the last word. All the things that make life interesting. Imagination gives us the opportunity to envision new possibilities. It is an essential launch pad for making our hopes come true. It fires our creativity, relieves our boredom, alleviates our pain, enhances our pleasure, and enriches our most intimate relationships. Without imagination, there is no hope, no chance to envision a better future, no place to go, no goal to reach. These words had me thinking about these wildly hopeful passages from the prophets that were spoken into the most awful situations. The prophet is inviting the people to look around. To look around. And if they looked around, they could easily have just started taking a tally of the losses, the lives and the dreams that were scattered and shattered, and yet they were back at home in this situation that was not secure. It was still very much an uphill battle to rebuild their home. But the prophet invited the people to stand and imagine a future that was very different from their present situation. Look around. Look for the light. Can you see it glow? During Epiphany, I've entitled the series that we're doing, Where is the Light? And I think that sometimes we need help finding it. And sometimes that looking requires imagination. We're going to sing the song that everybody loves, Where is the Light, for our closing song. And I love that song. The light's inside of me, the song says. And I love this. I think it's so beautiful as we're coming out of Christmas and we are looking for light in the darkness of our very long nights. It's beautiful when we think about this Emmanuel, this God with us, this incarnational love and light that each of us carry. That we each have the opportunity to reflect and to shine into the world. Where is the light? The prophet says, lift up your eyes and look around. And as I lift up my eyes and I look around and I sing this song and I think it's inside of me, which means that it's also inside of each of you. And if it's inside of me and it's inside of you, then it's inside of every living thing, just waiting to be seen. Epiphany reminds us in our wisdom that like the other wise ones following a star, we are drawn to the light. We lit our candles on Christmas Eve to remember where our light comes from. We look around and of course we see darkness, and oh my goodness, this week has given us plenty of reminders that our world is on shaky ground. The barriers to peace are seemingly insurmountable. The world is literally on fire this week. Escalations of global conflict bring uncertainty into our world. You know, Greta's been studying World War I. I'm talking about you. She was paying attention. She's been studying World War I in school this past little bit, and so she asked me the other day, do you think that there'll be a World War III? I mean, it's like, oh my goodness, the darkness. Where is the light? It is so easy to fall into despair. We are given so many opportunities. So how do we instead engage the imagination of the prophets, envisioning something new? Instead of being sucked in by the darkness, how do we instead look for the light? There are all kinds of activities that we can do throughout our day to help us kind of focus in on the goodness and to see the light. Perhaps you each have favorite ways that you go about just connecting to the source of that light. Throughout Epiphany, we're going to be looking at just little teeny tiny practices that can help us tune in to this light in our ordinary lives. This week's practice, I invite all of us to just pick a regular activity that we do every day, something that's part of your ordinary routine. It can be your regular cup of coffee, washing your dishes, brushing your teeth, your drive to work. And just use that time as a time to just focus on a short little blessing. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be really involved. It doesn't have to have a lot of words. It can be as simple as light of Christ, shine in me. Just to serve as a reminder of where we look for our light. Sometimes that light is in unexpected places. The wise men came looking for a king and they went to Jerusalem because where else would a king be? But what they found was something very different. The light was leading them to a very different place, Bethlehem of all places. Seek and you will find is kind of a real thing, I think. And if you look for the light, I think that in most places you're going to find it. But sometimes that looking requires eyes of imagination, that kind of prophetic imagination that has the predator laying peacefully right next to the prey. that has that prophetic imagination that offers us that image of a desert in full bloom, when the opposite is the reality that we are standing in. This week, as I've been pondering how we engage this prophetic imagination in our own lives, I think, oh my goodness, the darkness and despair can easily overwhelm us. How can we imagine a world made new, restored, made whole? And then I think that as the wise ones that we are, we can look for the light. We can chase down the light. We can point to the light. We can witness to the light. And we can reflect the light of Christ into the world. So now I invite you into the conversation. Where have you seen the light? Are there unexpected places where you have witnessed the light? Do you have practices that you use to train yourself to find that light? What role does imagination play in your spiritual life? Welcome to the conversation.